Every second, America's debt grows by tens of thousands of dollars. Every minute, millions more. Every hour, the country sinks deeper into a financial hole that few dare to measure, and even fewer truly understand. They say it's normal. That debt is just part of a modern economy. But there's nothing normal about borrowing from the future to survive the present. The truth is, the US economy isn't built on gold or growth anymore. It's built on promises, and every promise adds another line to the national IOU. Today on Market Pulse, we'll trace America's debt timeline, from the birth of the Republic to the trillion-dollar days of 2025, and uncover how the world's richest nation became the world's largest debtor. The story begins in 1790. Alexander Hamilton, the nation's first Treasury Secretary, proposed that the new federal government assume all state debts from the Revolutionary War. The total was just $75 million, but it set a precedent, the idea that debt could unite the country and power its growth. For the next century, America borrowed during wars and paid down during peace. After the Civil War, the national debt hit $2.8 billion, but by the early 1900s, it had fallen sharply. Then came the Great Depression and World War II, two crises that rewrote the rules. By 1945, U.S. debt had exploded to $269 billion, roughly 120% of GDP, the highest level ever recorded up to that point. But after victory in Waishu, the United States stood alone as the world's economic superpower. Debt didn't feel like danger. It felt like dominance. The post-war boom created what many still call the Golden Age, a time of record growth, low unemployment, and an expanding middle class. Behind the scenes, though, the U.S. was rewriting how money itself worked. At Bretton Woods in 1944, global leaders agreed to make the U.S. dollar the world's reserve currency, backed by gold. This gave America enormous power. Foreign nations trusted the dollar, and that trust allowed the U.S. to borrow cheaply. The world's prosperity became tied to America's promise. But as the decades passed, spending outpaced discipline. The Vietnam War and President Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs demanded massive funding. Foreign countries, noticing rising deficits, began trading their dollars for gold. By the late 1960s, the U.S. gold reserves were draining, and faith in the dollar was cracking. In August 1971, President Richard Nixon made the fateful announcement: the U.S. would no longer convert dollars to gold. It was meant to be temporary. It became permanent. From that moment, the dollar was backed by nothing but government decree, what economists call fiat money. At first, most Americans didn't notice, but over time the effects were undeniable. Inflation soared, purchasing power fell, and by 1980 the national debt had climbed to $908 billion. The United States had officially entered a new era, one of limitless credit and limitless consequences. The 1980s ushered in what economists now call the age of leverage. President Ronald Reagan promised lower taxes and stronger defense, but both came with a price. The debt crossed $1 trillion for the first time in history. By 1990, it had tripled to $3.2 trillion. The U.S. learned a dangerous lesson. Borrowing didn't have to hurt. Debt could grow indefinitely as long as investors kept buying treasury bonds. During the 1990s, economic growth and new technology brought optimism and talk of future surpluses. But while Washington bragged about balanced budgets, entitlement spending, Social Security, Medicare, and interest payments quietly ballooned. By the year 2000, America owed $5.6 trillion. The good times hid the cracks. No one realized the next 2 decades would double, then double again, that number. The 21st century began with crisis. After the attacks of September 11th, the U.S. launched 2 wars and financed them entirely on credit. By 2008, the housing market collapsed, and the government bailed out the banks using the same strategy: print, borrow, repeat. The debt skyrocketed to $10 trillion by 2008, then $16 trillion by 2012. When the pandemic struck in 2020, America's response shattered all precedent. Trillions were printed in months. Checks were mailed, companies rescued, and inflation quietly reignited. By 2021, debt surpassed $28 trillion, and by 2023, it crossed $33 trillion. The unthinkable had become the everyday. In 2025, the debt clock now ticks past $34 trillion, closing in on $35 trillion by year's end. To put that in perspective, America adds about $1 trillion every 100 days. Interest payments alone are now among the largest expenses in the federal budget, surpassing defense and rivaling Medicare. Economists call this a debt spiral, when a country must borrow more just to pay the interest on what it already owes. Unlike the post-war era, there is no new industrial boom waiting to lift the nation out. Instead, the U.S. faces a slow erosion, a drift from strength to fragility, held together by hope and habit. The government assures the public everything is under control, but deep down, people can feel it, the quiet unease that comes when numbers grow faster than logic. In 1790, America's debt was $75 million. In 2025, it's $35 trillion. The pattern is clear. Each generation inherits more promises and less freedom to keep them. The real question isn't how high the debt can go. It's how long faith in the system can last. This isn't fear. It's the timeline, written in numbers that don't lie. Because history has shown, when a nation builds its prosperity on borrowed time, the bill always comes due.